Hey everyone, we are back, episode 2 with our EBV explanations, and Jason Archer here still. We're going to drill a little bit deeper into, we've got our set of EBVs, but within that set they're broken up into a little bit of groups, aren't they?
Trait groups, yep.
Yep. So what are they?
What are the groups?
Yeah.
So probably the start ones that we normally have are sort of like around the Calving and birthing type of situation. So Calving, gestation length and birth weight normally.
So birth weight goes in there as opposed to with the weight group, or is he a hangover?
Just hangover, really. Okay. Like it's, they're all related to each other. So it's a little bit artificial to divide them up. But we sort of do for convenience.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's the Calving ones, and then there's how well does the animal grow while it's growing out. Then related to that, of course, is how big the cow ends up.
Yeah.
And then now we're starting to talk about maternal type stuff. So how big is the cow? How well does she milk? And then we move into the fertility type of things. So how fertile are her genetics? And then we normally the other main group is the carcass. So let's, describing how good the carcass is. So how heavy it is, what the fat is on it, and what the intramuscular fat, the marbling inside the meat is. And then sometimes there's some add-on ones depending on what people are measuring. So, docility would be one of those.
Yeah.
And, as time goes on, we've produced, the royal wheat has produced more and more traits that are of interest. And, as we get our cattle to where we want them to be for one trait, well, then other opportunities open up to do different things. Yeah.
And within these groups and these traits, it's influenced by what we're recording on farm, is that right?
Yeah, well, we can only analyse what we've measured, right?
Yeah.
So we've got to measure stuff to be able to do that. So, on farm, when you go to buy a bull, the breeder has put in a lot of work. So, on that animal, they've had to record stuff about the animal itself. So was it a bull, is it a heifer, its date of birth, who its mother and father were, and then from that we work out how old the mother was as well. So a heap of stuff. So
where does that come into it? Where does the age of the cow, which trait does that come into? Or is it across the board?
We would probably adjust across the board for those traits. Because it has an influence right at the early start of the life of an animal. We probably don't adjust for it when we come to the cow traits, the fertility type traits. But all these other traits that, when the animal's growing and producing a carcass, we really need to know how old the animal is.
Oh, that's cool.
So the breeders, that's about the actual animal itself, but then that's before we've actually measured any performance of the animal. So then it's okay, what are we going to measure about performance of the animal? So we want to know, one, was it assisted coming out of the calf? Coming out of the cow, sorry.
Yeah.
And then secondly, what did it weigh at birth? Because that's probably a good indication.
Yeah.
It's an indicator of how well that calving is going to go. And then we want to know how well it grew to weaning. And then we tend to say, well, how well did it grow to yearling or 400 days? And then where did it get to at 600 days? And 600 days is, that's 20 months of age. It's about when we kill our cattle. So we want to probably have a weight then. And then one thing we do really want to know is how big those cows are going to end up. And actually that's one thing that could be recorded a lot better and a lot more by breeders, and I'm talking around the world.
Yeah.
Getting more information on how big their cows are. So weighing their cows every year. And then, where do we go from there? So we want to know its fertility. So we have to record when the bull went out, and then we use the calving date to say, well, when did she calve? So how did she get in calf, and how early did she get in calf, essentially? And then we move to carcass weights or carcass traits, and it's a little bit hard, right? Because we obviously can't kill all the bulls and then sell them as breeding bulls. So and
we're limited a little bit because our works don't go into our freezing work stuff doesn't go into there, does it, in New Zealand?
Not yet. So what we have to do for carcass traits is generally we're using ultrasound to measure them on live animals, and it's not perfect. The fat depths are really good. the IMFs are pretty good,
Mm-hmm.
like they're probably 70% correlation with the actual marble scores. And so we get and that's a specialist job, right? So someone comes out here with an ultrasound machine, and they'll measure those traits for you, and you have to pay the money to do that. And then we develop the predictions out of that. It is great to have actual carcass data, as you were talking about before, but that's really got to be from, well, obviously animals that are killed, and they've got to be animals that we know the pedigree and the relatedness of those animals to the bulls that you're trying to estimate. So often that's done in structured progeny tests, but they're expensive, and we don't, we've got beef and lamb runs a couple of those, but that's probably it in terms of carcass data at the moment. It would be great to then start generating some of that data coming back from cull animals and in stud herds. That's useful information. Got to be a little bit careful of it because it is the bottom half. And is not necessarily representative. So we need to account for that in the analysis as well. So so there's a lot of stuff that we need to measure, and then if we want to get really sophisticated, when we get into what we call the hard to measure or expensive to measure traits, and that would be things like feed intake and feed efficiency, which that's been available for 25 years, but it's hard, and so therefore not many people have done it in New Zealand. A couple of people are doing it now, but that's only relatively recent. And down the track there'll be other things that we might want to do. So methane might be one of them. So
that's something I've been thinking about a little bit lately. Is right now there's things that we can record, but we don't necessarily send them to breed plan. But they're quite important to keep recording, because one day we might be able to, and we might be able to backdate our data, right? So I'm thinking like body condition scoring and things like that. At some point we may be able to use that information. So if you can measure it, because who knows what's down the track.
And body condition score, that's something that we're really keen to actually produce, right? So people with back data, as you say, that have been measuring it for a while, well, they'll have a head start in terms of the quantity of their data. But I mean, if you can't start yesterday, right, but you can start today.
And again, all of these things come back to knowing your breed objectives and which set of traits you were going to look at specifically, because everything comes down to your place and your farm and your stock.
Exactly. And not all the, there's, depends, 22, 25, depends on how many EBVs you've got. Not all of them are going to be exactly relevant to your situation. And, one I like to talk about in terms of that is like scrotal circumference, which is obviously the circumference of the scrotal on a young bull. And so why do we have that EBV? So to me, it is a little bit related to cow fertility, but it's only about 25%. It's not a great predictor of cow fertility. It is it's a bit of a predictor of early puberty. But that EBV was fundamentally introduced for breeders to be able to breed sire bulls for sale that have adequate serving capacity. And you only need adequate, right? You don't. Once you've got enough, more than enough doesn't help. But also, if I'm a commercial producer and I'm selling steers, I don't actually make any money out of scrotums, right? So I don't need to look at that. I do need to look at the days to calving, because that's the female fertility, which is what's really ruling the roost in my system, is the female fertility. So to me, that one's a great example of it's a tool for a breeder. As a commercial person buying bulls, I want to look at female fertility, which is days to calving.
And then, so are there a few traits like that? Like I wonder, like calving ease, is there a point where enough is enough?
Definitely. And it's, where that point is will differ for everyone a little bit. But, talk to your breeders and get their experience. But, once you're down to, hardly pulling in, only pulling a couple of heifers out of every 100, and probably half of them are backwards or malpresentations, which is not the bull's fault, right? It's not necessarily genetic. It's just the way things have happened. You can't get any better than pulling no calves, right? And there is a penalty to pay for chasing calving ease forever, right? Because they will tend to be smaller bulls with lower growth rates. So we don't want to keep pushing that one further than what we need to, because we're going to penalise ourselves in other areas. So
yeah. So it's about that balance, isn't it? And I actually saw a thing, I'll see if I can find it to put on this video, but when we were in Canada, one of the breeders there put up a slide and it had the percentiles, and he highlighted specific to his program, and I think he had green, yellow and red was don't touch this, yellow's it's okay, and green was, and so his whole thing was coloured in, and it just gave him a real clear path of where he can sit when he goes to select his bulls, and so we're going to do a bit of that later about breed objectives, because they're really important, right?
Absolutely.
Yep. Cool. Right. Well, next episode we'll get a bit deeper again. So hang in there, team. Keep an eye out for episode 3.